My brother got the corner table and a toast. My seat came with a reminder to be grateful I was invited. The dining room had that practiced glow. Candlelight low enough to forgive, spotlights high enough to flatter, prices printed in a typeface that pretended not to shout. I arrived last with ink still on my fingers from the client draft, and the host looked down at the reservation, read my last name, blinked once like a camera catching a flare, and then ironed his face smooth again. He lifted 3 menus and led me past the wall of Bordeaux into the room where we used to celebrate Christmas Eve before my father discovered golf trips. My family had already staked the corner banquette, the one with the view of the whole floor so you could measure your evening against other people's. My mother's bracelets chimed their practiced approval at my brother's promotion, and my father held the wine list at an angle that hid the numbers but not the posture. My brother, fresh off a title change and a LinkedIn post with 312 congratulations, lifted his glass and drew the room's light to himself like it had been trained for this. "There she is," he said, like a man narrating an arrival he didn't wait for. "We were starting without you." They performed our old ritual. "To the man of the hour," my father declared, swollen with a benevolence I'd seen him use on head waiters and junior associates. My mother added, "Order anything," with the precise smile she reserves for holidays and engagements, and then glanced at me. "You'll understand when you're successful," she said. The way some people say grace, automatic, unexamined, final. I smoothed my napkin and let humiliation settle in my lap like an extra course. I've worked rooms like this. I know where they hide the truth. Hospitality has a grammar if you've paid attention. The captain's eyes skim a POS screen to check notes you'll never see. The runner outpaces the server when a table has a birthday or a banker. The host does a quick shoulder tilt to make space where there isn't any because certain names make space. Tonight the tells were everywhere. The host's double take at my name. The server's first, "Good evening, sir," landing in my direction instead of my father's. A small, perfect amuse-bouche, 2 bites of smoked trout on rye, placed in front of me alone with a murmured, "With compliments," while my brother reached for it and then pretended he hadn't. My father toward me for a barely there confirmation. 2 tables over, a woman in a power suit waved a manila envelope, and the server didn't flinch. I recognized the rhythm of a room that has decided in advance who matters. Anger came slow. It always does with my family, simmering under a glazed surface, finding its own boil. I remembered bussing tables in college, counting tips in the break room that smelled like bleach and limes, learning exactly how status gets plated alongside dessert. I remembered why I left that world, and why I never stopped reading it. My brother recited org charts like scripture, and my father interrupted to explain venture debt to the waiter, who nodded with the precise, expressionless courtesy of a man paid to nod. I felt heat rise. Not theatrical, not for show. Useful heat, the kind that turns water to tea. There were other signals my family didn't notice. A chef in whites took a step out from the pass, scanned the room, and let his gaze brush mine with professional recognition. The sommelier arrived with a list and angled it toward me, not the promotion. "If you'd like to guide," she said quietly. I shook my head and watched my brother miss the exchange entirely, while performing magnanimity for our parents and the couple at the next table who had begun to eavesdrop with the eagerness of people paying for entertainment. "Let's not overthink it," my father announced, flipping his menu closed as if that were a type of decisiveness. "We'll start with oysters and a steak for the gentleman of the night." He clapped my brother's shoulder. "And the bill," he added, laughing as if generosity could be measured in decibels, "goes wherever the wind blows it." I watched my brother bask, confident the wind knew his address. The host reappeared, leaning into our server's ear with a whisper practiced in a dozen languages. Their eyes flicked, not quite together, toward me and then away, professionally blank in the way that says everything without staining a thing. My mother tracked the whisper like a cat tracks a light. "Service isn't what it used to be," she murmured, already poised to be disappointed. My brother waved his hand. "Please," he said to no one in particular, "let's try not to embarrass ourselves." We hadn't ordered. We hadn't even asked for water refills. Still, the maitre d' tapped the corner with one fingertip and lifted his eyes to mine with a respect that didn't ask permission from anyone else at the table. "Per ownership notes on file." So softly the phrase seemed meant. "Shall we proceed as usual?" The butter knives were polished, the insults were not. They dropped the bread like a peace offering, warm sourdough crescents in a towel-lined basket, a ramekin of cultured butter stippled with sea salt, tiny knives glinting as if they'd been taught manners. My brother reached first and narrated the chew like a wine note, humble bragging about the Paris offsite where he learned to appreciate gluten. My mother followed with her favorite side dish, commentary disguised as care. "You should take some home," she said, splitting a heel. "Your apartment oven never really gets hot, does it? Those old buildings." She didn't look up long enough to see that mine does, that it always has. The room worked its choreography around us. In the open kitchen, plates crossed beneath heat lamps like constellations, the past captain's hand a silent metronome. A manager made discreet rounds, stopping to adjust a candle, align a fork, murmur a table number into a sleeve mic. I kept my own rhythm. Document first, react never. It's a muscle memory from service. When the floor tilts, steady your feet and start counting. I noted the time the amuse arrived, the names from the server's lapel pin and the captain's tie bar, the way the host reappeared within 30 seconds of the maitre d's folio, and angled himself to give us a sightline to the kitchen we hadn't asked for. Deference isn't random. It's rehearsed. My brother told a story about his promotion that involved more acronyms than verbs, chuckling at his own restraint. "It's not a big deal," he said, and then made it big on purpose. My mother buttered another piece and asked if I was still doing the freelance thing, the thing she says the way other mothers say, phase. She asked about my car next. "You could lease something nicer, image matters," and then about whether I'd considered moving to a safer neighborhood, as if danger were a hobby I picked up for attention. I let the humiliation pass through me, the way a dining room expels smoke when the exhaust kicks in, quietly, efficiently, with no visible complaint. My father tapped the wine glass to test its ring. "Next bottle on you, kiddo," he said, toward them anyway. The server, whose name tag read Alex in neat block letters, approached with the kind of attention that says, "Please trust me to make this easy." He described the specials to my brother and then turned, unbidden, to me. "Chef can do a half order of the scallops to follow the oysters," he said, as if we'd planned it together last week. He asked me if I preferred the rye or the levain with the butter. He poured my water from the still bottle instead of the sparkling at the edge of my father's elbow. Little edits. All correct. My mother noticed one of them and flinched. "We didn't order that," she told Alex, when a second amuse appeared. Tiny radishes in sweet cream butter dusted with pink salt, set between my brother and me but aligned to my plate. "Compliments of the kitchen," he said, meeting my eyes, not hers. "We're glad you're here." He moved away before my father could redirect the narrative back to himself. "You know people here?" my brother asked, suspicion threaded through performative ease. "I worked hospitality," I said. "You never forget a language." He nodded like he'd heard French and could not be bothered. The oysters landed, briny and shining, and my father made a show of selecting the most charitable dozen. He positioned the plate so one sat in front of my mother and 5 in front of him, leaving 6 for my brother, and a single one for me because math in our house has always had a target. Alex noticed without blinking and slid a second plate in, from the chef, with 3 extra on crushed ice. My brother frowned at the correction and then smiled because he'd been seen frowning. The maitre d' came back to adjust my mother's napkin, which had slipped to the floor. He didn't need to, but the floor was sending us a message only I could hear. "We are tuned to you." It surprised me anyway. Surprise in me doesn't arrive wide-eyed. It tightens my shoulders and loosens my jaw. It's the body's way of saying, "Careful, something is about to give." Humiliation thinned to a simmer, the kind you can cook with. I kept counting. The amuse at 7:14, the first pour at 7:18. Polished a glass he'd already polished. The kind of deference they were offering me wasn't the kind you slip to a VIP who posted a review once. It was the institutional kind, the kind that lives in training manuals and back office notes and ownership memos. It folded over me and then settled like a jacket that fits. "Smile, honey," my mother said as if she were saving me from myself. "You look intense." My brother laughed, relieved to be thrown a line. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll make a real diner out of you yet." Alex set down the bread a second time with fresh butter, the sea salt glistening, knives reset. He addressed the table, but his words belonged to me. "If there's anything you'd like the kitchen to send out," he said, "just say the word." It wasn't a script. It was a promise. I lifted my water, let the glass cool my palm, and forced my face smooth again. The pass shouted, "Pick up!" The expediter called numbers, a runner darted past, and my phone vibrated against the linen. Unknown number. I don't usually answer at tables. I didn't answer now. I glanced, reflex only, prepared to swipe it away. The preview line pinned me to my chair. "We're honored you came in. Anything special you want the kitchen to send out?" Our server recited a special I'd only heard in chef meetings. Evan didn't read from the card. He opened with halibut collar, lacquered, brushed with burnt lemon, finished with fennel pollen, the kind of off-menu trust fall kitchens reserve for insiders. Then, without theatrics, he asked, "We'll avoid pine nuts, yes?" I hadn't mentioned my allergy. My mother blinked. My brother smirked about influencer comps. I let humiliation pass through me and settle as a slow heat. Evan slid a thinner leather panel from behind the wine list, the cellar version, handwritten allocations and quiet vintages. He angled it to me, not my father. "Chef thought you'd appreciate the 14 Saint Aubin, or a côte rôtie if you want weight with the tomahawk." The word quiet told me this list wasn't for show. My father tried to reclaim the table with a wallet on linen gesture. My brother ordered like a man who just learned expense account. I told Evan to course to the kitchen. Let them speak. Old muscle memory stirred. Years ago I approached. Soft shoes, measured smile. He set down a truffled custard amuse I'd only ever tasted during pre-openings, placed a twin by my brother, fairness and lesson, and then laid a closed leather folio by my plate, centered as if it belonged there. "We'll keep this here," he said, calm as a ledger, "from the owner's reserve." Before anyone could protest appetizers, he tapped the folio twice and added, almost conversational, "We'll settle it however you prefer." They sent the bill with the bread, like a warning label. The basket landed with theater, warm sourdough under linen, sea salt butter shining in candlelight, and, parked on my place setting as if it belonged there, a closed leather folio. My mother's smile crystallized. "Well, since you recommended this place." My father chuckled like a judge who'd already ruled. "Good night for you to pick up the check. Your brother deserves a break." He lifted his glass, newly promoted and effortlessly adored. I swallowed humiliation, let it settle into a steady simmer. I hadn't picked this restaurant. His assistant had, CCing half the family with a link about power tables. In our house, optics outranked facts. I cracked the folio anyway. Not a check, yet. A pre-printed receipt stub, the kind that prints at close, not hello. Across the header, a faint gray blur hid a corporate account name. Below, a house account number and a gratuity flag I recognized from places that share tips with the dish pit. You don't blur a header unless you expect the wrong eyes. You don't drop a folio early unless you're staging a reveal. "See," my dad said, leaning in like proximity conferred authority. My brother smirked about influencer comps. I closed the folio softly and handed it to our server. "Evan, would you hold this until dessert? We'd like to enjoy the evening." He nodded with the kind of deference reserved for people who sign paychecks, not just receipts. "Of course, we'll move at your pace." My mother filled the quiet with polished digs about my freelance freedom, how I'd understand stability one day. I let them glide past and thumbed my phone, not to escape, but to confirm leverage I'd promised myself I'd never use out of spite. Buried in my notes sat a PDF labeled simply, Operating Agreement. Signature page. Ownership schedule. Last year, asking my brother about his promotion with perfect warmth, then set the cadence with the kind of calm you can't rent. My parents tried another round of hints about who would pay, their voices lacquered with civility. I set down my glass, ready to decide whether tonight would end in a lesson or a ledger. Before I could choose, a hand hovered, respectful weight, not ownership, at my shoulder. "The owner would like to say hello," Evan murmured, voice pitched for me alone. as the GM approached with a second folio I didn't need to open to know was already settled. Restaurants are built on noise. Real decisions happen in the hall. The GM slipped a hand toward the aisle with a tact that read like fluency, steering me past the espresso station and the host stand's smile armor into a narrow back corridor where the soundtrack shifted from curated laughter to the honest clatter of pans. Low sconces cast a soft glow across framed reviews and opening night photos, the kind of shrine every dining room keeps just out of sight. The air was warmer here, laced with butter and heat lamp breath, and the tile underfoot held that faint vibration of a place earning its rent plate by plate. He stopped beneath a black and white photo of line cooks grinning through steam, and pitched his voice to that comfortable register people use with partners, not guests. "Thank you for coming in," he said, my first name precise and private. "The chef's been excited since your res got flagged, and the owner wanted a moment if you're open to it." Humiliation still prickled along my collarbone from the table theater, the early folio, the assumption I'd pay because I'd allegedly picked the place, the jokes meant to pass for fatherly ribbing. I had learned a long time ago to breathe through heat until it condenses into something usable. "I'm open," I said, even though every instinct reminded me that in my family, stepping out of the dining room was always how someone got rewritten. The owner rounded the corner with a composure that didn't need volume. Younger than my parents would believe a balance sheet allows, not dressed to be recognized, just present the way good capital is, quiet, patient, in the room before you know it. "I wanted to say thank you," he began, first name again, steady handshake, the welcome of someone who understood how much it costs to show up, and vendor renegotiations done over porch steps with masks on, the language of trust standing in for collateral. The seed round that never closed in public because optics mattered more than survival to people who preferred glossy exits. A cap table with my initials in 8-point font because the strategy then had been to keep sharks bored. "We're doing a cap table update," he said, glancing at the framed photo like it helped him choose his nouns. "Auditor insistence, post-raise housekeeping. Your tranche vests fully next week. The GM flagged your name on the res and we thought it might be kinder to speak where you can hear us." There it was, that small, private surprise that feels like stepping into sunlight after living in climate-controlled shade. Vindication doesn't often announce itself. It emerges as a shift in temperature and a sentence that uses the correct pronoun. "I appreciate the heads up," I said, voice even because the habit is muscle now. "The NDA still stands." He nodded. "We've kept it low by design. Only question is yours. Do you want to keep it low-key tonight or correct the record at the table? Either way, the kitchen's sending what you like. Evan remembers." Memory filed the details I hadn't let my family see. The cellar wine list without prices, because price isn't the point when you're stewarding inventory instead of flexing. The quiet check-ins that had nothing to do with flattery and everything to do with craft. The text that pinged earlier, "We're honored you came in," because hospitality is a two-way street when everyone's doing their job. I could carry the scene back to the table in two directions. Low, and let the bill resolve itself in the POS the way water finds level. Or high, and let the truth stand up in public for once. Not to humiliate anyone, just to retire a lie that had grown fat on my patience. Humiliation flickered again, replaying my father's faux genteel lecture about stability, and my brother's aside about influencer comps, the kind of insult that assumes visibility equals value. I had spent years making myself a rumor on purpose, because the work worked better that way. But tonight, the rumor had been used against me like a tip jar to be emptied. Surprise tightened into something closer to resolve. What happens if we correct the record? Sheet for optics. Leave the narrative alone. The team will know either way. The dining room doesn't have to. He was right. Dignity doesn't require a stage. It does, however, require that you choose it on purpose. I pictured returning to the table, hands empty, voice measured, and letting the check vanish backstage into a ledger that bore my signature before anyone at home believed I had one. I pictured the other version, where I said almost nothing and let someone else say the only sentence that mattered with the kind of economy I'd wished my family would learn. Either way, the outcome was the same. The bill would be handled by the entity that actually owned responsibility, and my father's favorite story would lose the oxygen it needed to keep burning. The corridor hummed with the kitchen's heartbeat. Somewhere beyond the wall, a ticket machine chirped and then fell quiet, as if even the printers were waiting to see which script tonight would follow. The owner glanced toward the dining room and then back at me like he was offering a clean exit and a clean entrance at the same time. "Your call," he said. "We'll match your pace." From the dining room, my father's voice arrived the way it always has, confident, careless, convinced volume is a proxy for truth. It threaded through the corridor's soft light and found us with unerring aim. "She can't afford this place anyway." He raised his glass to success and aimed it like a dart. When I slid back into my chair, the room had already reset to celebration mode. The bread plates were swept, the votives burned lower. My mother's smile had returned to its company Christmas party setting. My brother stood with the kind of practiced casualness that plays well on LinkedIn, chin lifted, jacket open, watch catching the light. He clinked his fork against a flute without waiting for agreement and let the sound gather every wandering conversation back to our corner. "To risk-takers," he said first, eyes glancing off his own reflection in the window, as if the skyline had risen on the strength of his calendar. "And to family who shows up." His gaze found me and lingered a beat too long, the joke landing where the bruise already lived. Laughter bubbled around the table, the kind that leaks mean before people realize they've spilled it. I felt the humiliation flare, lowered the bottle into the light like a quiet nod across a crowded room. My father beat him to the punchline. "Well, look at that," he said, tone strolling toward condescension. "Clout has its perks, kiddo. Comped bubbles for the content strategy." My mother's laugh landed on the rim of her glass, practiced and thin. My brother smirked. "Good for you," he said, performing magnanimity with the same ease he performs spreadsheets written by other people. "This place must need the press." Anger rose, less a flare than a controlled burn now, the kind you light on purpose to save the forest. I held my glass by the stem so I wouldn't grip too tightly and looked at Evan. "One pour," I said, steady, not a sip more. "And would you note, please, the account this dinner is posting to?" Evan's eyes flicked to mine in recognition that read like respect. He didn't hurry. He let the request choose its moment. The cork eased with a soft exhale you could feel in your teeth. He tasted for flaws, nodded once toward the ceiling, yes, it's right, and gave me the first 2 ounces with a care that made the table's earlier jokes feel as cheap as they sounded. The wine smelled like brioche and lemon rind, the kind of quiet richness you don't have to announce to believe. "Is that the cellar list?" my brother asked, trying for savvy and landing somewhere between guessing and bluff. "No prices, bold move." "Some rooms don't need price tags to know value," I said, letting the line sit there without sharpening it. Surprise flickered in his eyes, so quickly he couldn't decide whether to be offended or impressed. The GM hovered just beyond the flowers, not intruding, not retreating. Orbit steady. The dining room's noise washed back in and out like tide. At a neighboring table, a birthday candle sputtered. Across the aisle, a couple negotiated the terms of a truce only they could hear. In the open kitchen, a bell chimed, and plates slid across the pass under heat lamp glow. The whole system moved the way it does when it's built correctly. Separate parts, single aim. My father swirled, sniffed, announced a vintage 2 years off, then lifted his glass. "To your big night," pivoting the spotlight back to my eyebrows climbed. "Already?" she said, hunting outrage she could serve as sophistication. "We haven't had appetizers." I touched the folio with a fingertip and didn't open it. "We'll handle it at dessert," I said, same tone I'd use with a client scheduling a review. It wasn't a question, it was a temperature reading. My brother leaned in, voice pitched for our quadrant of the room. "No pressure, sis. If this is over your budget, Dad and I can—" "That won't be necessary," I said, not unkind. Evan has the note. Across the room, the owner paused at the pass, caught my eye, and gave the smallest nod. My call, as promised. I matched it with a breath, and the decision landed where it belonged. Calm satisfaction slid into place like a smart chair under a tired body. I lifted my glass. To risk takers, I said, returning my brother's earlier flourish to him without the barb. And to family who shows up. I tapped his flute, then my mother's, then my father's, keeping my gaze on the wine so no one could mistake my restraint for apology. The bubbles rose and broke in delicate strings that sounded like the kitchen's quiet laughter. Evan stepped in with the kind of timing you can't teach. Just train and trust. He held his order pad, not as prop, but as protocol. He didn't have to speak. He chose to, each syllable landing with the same care he had given the poor, projected just enough to travel beyond the flowers and the birthday candle, and the couple trying to stitch themselves back together. Per standing instruction, he said, clear and courteous. House account, owner authorization. I don't argue with opinions. I unwrap documents. The room did that hush I know from boardrooms and breakups. Not silence exactly, but the tight quiet that falls when everyone is waiting to see who blinks. My brother lowered his glass a fraction. My mother recalibrated her smile into concern. My father leaned back like a judge about to render common sense. The leather folio sat by my plate with the gravity of a gavel. I slid my phone from my bag and opened the only folder that matters when feelings start auditioning for facts. Since we're discussing who pays, I said, keeping my voice at the temperature of good service. Cash on delivery. Payroll came due. This operating agreement gave the majority member authority to fund and protect the floor. I tapped the clause, the sentence I could recite backwards. I covered the gap, twice. That's what owner authorization means here. It isn't clout. It's responsibility. My brother recovered first, which is his talent. Impressive speech, he said, because when you don't recognize the language, you call it a performance. But tonight is dinner, and at dinner, checks land somewhere. You picked the place. I didn't, I said, not rising to the bait. Your assistant booked it and put my name on the resi to make it look personal. Clever for optics, sloppy for records. I slid to the K1s. This is last year's allocation. Profit and loss are assigned by percentage ownership. Distributions follow cash flow and covenants, not birthdays and toasts. You want to split something? Great. We can split the depreciation table. My mother glanced at my father the way she does when she needs a ruling. He obliged. Still paying the bill, he said, pronouncing it as a moral. Principles aside, someone hands over a card. Of course, I said. Easy, non-combative. The business will. I nodded toward the folio, toward Evan, toward the system that has kept this dining room upright through 2 supply chain crises and a health department audit. Because this meal is not a surprise party. It's a brand moment. Your promotion brings eyes to this room. The room gives hospitality in return. That transaction lives on the house account per the policy I signed. We don't steal from service to soothe feelings. My brother laughed, a little brittle, a little loud. So now we're props? Come on. No, I said, and I let a piece of truth show because you cannot argue with someone who hasn't yet been told what game they're playing. Your guests. Guests are the point. The prop is the story you keep telling about me. Freelance, flailing, grateful to be invited. I helped write the standards manual for this group. It's why Evan knows to clear the check to the correct account, and why the GM sent from the reserve without making a scene. You can keep doubting me. The payroll doesn't.
Glass. Then let's have one, I said, and smiled because the surprise had started to catch. Nothing I've shown you is a flex. It's a ledger. Hospitality is a business. I'm showing you the receipt. My mother tried another angle, softened at the edges. You have to admit it looked like a stunt. The bottle, the initials. That tag is control, I said. Owner allocation gets tracked so inventory reconciles with cost of goods sold. It isn't flourish, it's audit.
Across the table, a couple glanced over, then away, the way people do when they recognize a tide turning. In the kitchen, a bell rang. The pass hummed. The room went on being a room that knows what it's doing. I locked the screen and slid the phone beside the folio, a small ritual that felt like closing an argument without raising my voice. Humiliation, the old roommate, had packed quietly and left sometime between the operating agreement and the K1. Anger was still here, but contained now, useful, a pilot light instead of a wildfire. Surprise had settled over my family's faces like new lighting, unforgiving, clarifying, not unkind. Vindication doesn't need applause, it needs accuracy. Calm arrived last, as it should, and pulled up a chair. My brother cleared his throat. "Fine," he said, searching for a way to win a game he hadn't learned. "If the business is paying, then consider this my thanks to the shareholders." "Members," I corrected, gentle. Different structure, same gratitude accepted. He rolled his eyes, but the resistance was performative now, muscle memory fading. My father reached for his water as if hydration might help him swallow a new narrative. My mother pressed her napkin into a tighter rectangle, the way she does when she is deciding whether to relent. A shadow crossed the table, and the room's attention sharpened the way it does when authority enters quietly. The owner stepped into our circle without abruptness, palms open, voice warm enough for a greeting and cool enough for policy. He didn't address the table. He addressed me. "We can keep this low-key," he said, eyes steady, "or we can correct the record at the table. Your call." My father leaned back, instinctively making space for a man whose name sits above the door, nodded to the GM. A cream envelope slid to my place. Year-to-date distributions. My percentage circled in ink. No theatrics, just arithmetic. I left it half visible beside the water glass. Paper steadies a table that used to wobble. My mother leaned in, perfume and surprise. "Since when?" "Since the lease addendum," I said evenly. "Since 30-day terms kept vendors whole. Since payroll ran on the worst Tuesday. Since it mattered." I didn't touch the envelope. I let the evidence breathe. My father cleared his throat, pride meeting facts. "Then why the show? Early check? Initialed bottle?" "It isn't a show," I said. "It's compliance. The tag tracks owner allocation. The folio routes account codes cleanly. Good service feels like theater because discipline is invisible." My brother tried one more time. "You could have told us. I'm telling you now," I said, lifting my glass not to gloat, but to reset. To work that counts whether or not anyone sees it. Evan arrived with the next course. "Rooting per standing?" he asked. "Per standing," the owner confirmed. The room absorbed it like tide into sand. The owner turned to my parents, not to scold, context, not victory. "This place exists because a few people took the boring risks," he said. "Freight, flour, payroll." She kept saying yes when it wasn't cute. My mother's eyes shone. "I didn't know." "You weren't supposed to," I said. "Tonight you just pick sea bass or steak." My brother gave a small, clean nod. "Okay, respect." Calm dropped like a plumb line finding true. The GM adjusted the candle. The flame leveled. My father glanced from the envelope to the owner, then to me. "So," he asked, curiosity outrunning pride. "Since when?" The owner looked at me for consent. I gave it with a nod that felt like signing something already earned. "Since before the soft opening." The loudest thing in the dining room was the sound of my father's jaw setting. I asked Evan to read the header so there would be no more whispered theories, no more darts wrapped in jokes. He didn't hesitate, didn't raise his voice, just let the facts travel the way. "You're so important here," he said, each word polished like a coin. "Then get us the family rate. Call it a discount for sentiment." Evan waited, eyes on me, the way staff watches not for approval but for clarity. I didn't make him hang there. "No discounts," I said, steady enough that even the candlestick didn't flicker. "Full rate, full tip. Staff first."
I slid the folio back toward him. Add a kitchen pool kicker at 20% of food sales and note it as owner directed. Back of house never gets the applause, and they're the reason the applause happens. My mother blinked. A kitchen pool? Dish, prep, grill, pastry, I said. They touch every plate. Dining rooms praise faces. Kitchens carry nights. If I'm going to spend money in public, it will create margin where it keeps people. Evan's nod was small, the kind people in aprons give when a decision lands where their rent lives. He left to adjust the ticket. The GM ghosted past to double the espresso order without being asked. The room's hum returned, not louder, just right-sized, as if the building had exhaled after holding its breath for a course too long. My brother tried to find footing on the old rug. So, the business pays when you say so. That means you're just comping yourself? It means owner-hosted events are budgeted in operating, I said. The way you say handrail when someone reaches for a curtain. We account for it, like linen, like training, like the rainy day fund that kept payroll intact when a shipment sat in a harbor for 3 weeks. It's not free, it's planned. My father's glass hit the table a little too firm. Planned, he repeated, as if the word were a boast. That sommelier bottle? Planned? Those extra dishes? Planned? Or is this where feelings pick the wine list? Owner allocations are tracked, I said, tapping the handwritten tag that still rested beside my side plate, my initials in a careful loop only 2 people in the building knew how to write. If it's not in the plan, we rebalance. We're boring on purpose. The desserts arrived like a punctuation mark the kitchen trusted me to place. Evan set the check down on the lip of the table, not in front of my father, not in front of home. My mother's hand drifted toward mine, then away, like a thought she wasn't ready to have out loud. I didn't know this is what you were doing with your days, she murmured. That was the idea, I said, and softened it with a small smile so the truth didn't sting more than it needed to. Risk looks better when it's quiet. Evan read the total line the way he'd read the header. Numbers clean, taxes noted, gratuity blank. I initialed authorizations where the system asked me to confirm what the room had already been told. The GM slid a slim envelope onto the corner, kitchen distribution schedule for the month, and I tucked it into my bag because not every kind of transparency belongs at a family table. My father watched the pen move, watched the folio close, watched me hand it back with the absent ease of someone who had done this before and would do it again when no one applauded. His jaw worked once, twice, and then found its target. You must have needed a real investor to make this work. They thought success looked like a suit. Mine looked like payroll receipts. When the check presenter closed, the noise at our table felt smaller, like the room had redrawn its borders and left just enough space for truth. My brother swirled the wine he'd spent the last 10 minutes dismissing. My father watched the stem as if the glass might confess something different than Evan had. I let them sit in the quiet. Noise is how people avoid learning. I didn't start with numbers. I started with a night that still lives in my chest. The hood failed mid-service during the winter surge, the kind of failure that turns a kitchen into a physics lesson with flames. The repair company quoted a week. The inspector quoted a shutdown. I called the insurer, invoked an equipment rider I'd insisted we add when everyone said we could trim fat, and wired the deductible before the steam had cleared. We lost a dinner. We didn't lose a week. That wire looked nothing like a press release. It looked like 15 line cooks getting paid Friday at 4. Across the table, my mother's face shifted first. Her hands know the weight of Fridays. I don't understand, my father said, though the shape of his mouth said he did and he didn't like it. Since when are you this? Since temporary dining restrictions meant learn procurement in a foreign language, I said. Since flour didn't arrive for 3 on when a compressor dies at 3 a.m. The owner stood just inside the kitchen door and met my eye long enough to say without words, "Keep going." That's philanthropy, my brother said, reaching for a shelf he thought would be sturdy. Not business. It's margin, I said. Safety is margin. So are relationships. So are clean books and leases with covenants that don't let a landlord turn a pandemic into a hobby. We wrote ours with a force majeure clause that didn't treat people like decorations. We added business interruption coverage when the premiums felt like a dare. We trained on curbside the week before the order hit, so our first night wasn't a YouTube tutorial with guests waiting in the rain. I didn't tell them about the nights I sat in the walk-in just to feel something cold, while spreadsheets screamed in my head. I kept to what counted. We took on a small tranche of debt with a rate we could live with if the world stayed on fire, and something we could pay off early if it didn't. We staged a soft reopening with half the seats but all the payroll, and I matched tips that week because generosity should never be a lottery. We signed NDAs, stayed out of pictures, and let paper speak because paper can be audited, feelings can be edited. Why didn't you say anything? My mother asked. The question pulled thin with hurt that wasn't about ego, just time. Because this fails louder if I get it wrong, I said. And because you taught me that if you bring home a stray, you feed it before you name it. The owner stepped forward, not to steal the story, but to put a frame around it. We're still here, she said, voice even, because when I printed the first menu in a pandemic, she was on the phone with our landlord writing a covenant that valued people like equipment. Because when I wanted to cut prep to save labour, she asked for recipe costs, not feelings. Because when a vendor tried to float 30 days to 60 without a price hold, she sent them a spreadsheet and a choice, instead of a threat. My father managed a chuckle sharpened to a point. And you need a real investor? Why? He asked, turning his gaze back to me.
Translate I'm impressed into I'm in charge. We'll expand when our people can take vacations without the building wobbling. This place isn't a pitch deck, it's a payroll. The GM returned with a small envelope and set it by my water glass. Year-to-date distributions per your request, she said, just loud enough for my family to understand that sentences do not have to be theatrical to be true. My brother's eyes flicked to the envelope like a cat tracking a laser pointer. So you're what? Taking money out while they're... He gestured vaguely at the line, the room, the city. It's an allocation, I said. Tax treatment, not a party favor. I paid capital calls when they were ice water, and I take distributions when they're a glass of tap. Up is not a personality. He sank back, glassy with a frustration that had nowhere to stick. My father pressed his lips together as if discipline could keep his worldview from cracking. My mother watched me and didn't speak, which is the respect some stories require. From the two-top behind my brother, a soft sound broke the surface of the evening. Not the scrape of a chair or the ring of a spoon. A woman with a reporter's notebook tucked beneath her menu looked up at the owner, then at me. Recognition lit her face in a way that had nothing to do with clout and everything to do with a name she'd been trying to source since an opening she wasn't invited to cover. She shaped the syllables silently, careful, like she knew how tables fracture. She mouthed my name. The meal ended when the story changed, not when the plates cleared. Evan set the folio by my water like it carried more than paper. On top, the owner authorization slip. I signed, printed my name clean for accounting, and added the only numbers I wanted remembered. Extra pool for BOH and FOH, circled so no one had to guess after midnight. Tell Wendy the crudo acid sang, tell Luis his grill marks were textbook, and tell Pastry that Sabayon didn't flinch, I said. Evan's smile said being seen pays a different kind of wage. The owner drifted close, professional, not performative. We can comp the reserve, she offered. No comps, I said. Full rate, full tip. We keep people with paychecks, not posts. My father swallowed whatever lecture he'd rehearsed. My mother reached, then stopped. Old reflex, long shadow. We're proud of you. We always knew. Discretion? I looked toward the line. The busser folding linen like a future. Pastry torching with monk-level focus. Let the team be the story, I said. She nodded, relieved. Not everyone asked to keep victories small enough to fit on a walk-in shelf. I initialed the amended slip. Evan thanked me for the pool. I thanked the staff by name. At the door, my father paused beneath a framed line that called this room an argument for staying. Next time, let me...
Next time, don't assume I can't, I said. That's more generous than any card. Home was quiet in the useful way kitchens are between rushes. My phone lit the counter with a preview that managed familiar and new in 5 words. Coffee tomorrow? I have a business idea. I woke up to a dozen messages and one I cared about, Evans. Team felt seen. Sun lit the sink I forgot to empty, glinting off the owner authorization slip I'd slid from my bag like evidence I no longer needed to clutch. The voicemail stack looked like a family reunion. Missed calls, revised histories, performative pride, while the only text that mattered was 4 words and a period at the end. Team felt seen. It landed where last night's humiliation had sat for years, then softened what it touched. I made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in and opened my laptop the way a chef opens a walk-in. Inventory first, then prep. Payroll hit at 7:02 a.m. Direct deposits confirmed clean. The tip pool transfer read supplemental, owner off, cleared. Vendor EFTs lined up like servers before doors. No comp write-offs, no vanity waste. It was a ledger that told a story without adjectives. People did the work. The work paid people. The restaurant remained itself. Integrity over optics. That's the menu I choose. By 8, my brother's coffee text had matured into 3 follow-ups and a calendar invite with a subject line that tried to sound collaborative. I met him at a place with wobbly tables and perfect espresso, because the former keeps conversations honest, and the latter keeps them short. He arrived with posture and a deck. He led with vision, pop-ups, merch, a vague accelerator, then drifted toward control disguised as counsel. I did what I hadn't been given last night. I listened until he finished the part he'd practiced, then asked the questions money asks when it respects itself.
Starts. He laughed like I was kidding until he saw I wasn't. Something unclenched in his jaw. You really did all that, he said. Not as accusation anymore, but as discovery. I didn't rehearse grace. I just let it arrive and sit down. I did, I said. And none of it works if the people who carry plates don't carry dignity out with them. He nodded, a real one this time, and pocketed the list. I filed the last of last night's paperwork from a 2-top by the window, while the cafe filled with laptop light and second chance. Copies of the authorization slip and gratuity supplement to accounting. Note to the GM about a filter humming in the walk-in that might quit on a hot day. Thank you emails to the line, with names, not roles, because people are not back of house in my sentences. When the replies came, they were as spare as a good plate. Got it. Appreciated. See you soon. Quiet language for sturdy things. On my walk home, I cut past the restaurant. Pre-shift lights glowed a soft rehearsal. Someone was breaking down herbs at the bar, the green smell sliding through the door every time the host propped it with a knee. The prep playlist was low, the kind of bass line that keeps knives honest. A dishwasher laughed, quick and bright, and I remembered the night the hood failed and we cooked under fans and determination while I wrote an emergency check with hands that didn't shake. Legacy is a word my family uses like a marquee. This was its opposite, a hum under everything, built quietly, proving itself every service. My phone buzzed with a different kind of attention, a reporter from last night asking for a quote, a knowing tone in her punctuation. I replied like I run a kitchen line. No story. Just service. Tell the truth about the bread program, I texted. And the way the GM greets line cooks by name. That's the headline. She sent back a single period and a heart I didn't acknowledge. Boundaries, like mise en place, keep the rush from swallowing you. At noon, my mother left a voice message that tried to braid apology into advice. My father's followed, heavy with offers I'd learned were leashes. I didn't delete them. I filed them in a folder named for the year I stopped asking. Would add a clause for emergency capital cadence, revisit force majeure definitions everyone pretends to read, and tighten the language on assignment so no one could sell a future we hadn't priced. By 5, I had a CTA draft in my notes for the channel, the only kind I trust. Flat, useful, unpretty. If you've ever been handed the bill for someone else's celebration, here's how paper, boundaries, and quiet work change the story. Learn your documents. Tip like decisions depend on it. and let the receipts speak when the room doesn't. That's not a hook. That's a practice. When I reached my building, the lobby smelled like rain and envelopes. The concierge slid a certified letter across the counter, green card still warm from a pen. My name, typed clean. Return address, familiar in the way a good menu becomes muscle memory. Inside, thick stock and signatures. An invitation to join a second concept as majority partner. Operating terms pre-drafted in the language I write for myself now. No savior clauses. No exposure without authority. No optics without payroll. I held it under the hallway light until the letters stopped swimming. Last night ended a story. This morning wrote a new menu. I initialed the received line, tucked the envelope under my arm, and climbed the stairs with the only hunger that doesn't embarrass me anymore. The one that asks for work worthy of its appetite. If you've ever been handed someone else's bill, literal or emotional, hit like. Tell me in the comments, would you have kept it quiet or read owner authorization out loud sooner? Subscribe for more first-person twists where paper, boundaries, and calm work flip the room. Share this with a friend who needs the reminder that receipts tell the real story. Watch next, the deed in the safe saga that started this whole series.